Hungary's parliament has approved Sweden's application to join NATO, paving the way for the Scandinavian country to become the alliance's 32nd member. It comes after months of delays, but now the Hungarian approval eliminates the final roadblock to Sweden's unanimous requirement to join the military bloc.
Jóvá hagyjuk Svédország NATO csatlakozását is.
There are now 32 members in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization after Hungary's parliament approved Sweden's application.
This is an historic day. It makes NATO stronger, Sweden safer, and all of us more secure.
Hungary was the last holdout after Turkey agreed to Sweden's accession in January.
Sverige lämnar nu 200 år av.
Sweden's Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson says membership in NATO is a big step and that Sweden is now leaving behind 200 years of neutrality and non-alignment.
Finally, it's been a while, so I'm glad it's been voted on now. Yeah, it's been a long journey.
We've been talking about NATO for as long as I remember, since I was in high school, on and off, and mostly I feel relieved, finally.
Sweden and neighboring Finland decided to seek NATO membership after Russia's invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago. While Finland was able to join in April of last year, Sweden was kept waiting as both Turkey and Hungary held up the process. Unanimous support among all NATO members is required to admit new countries to the military alliance.
We very much look forward in the days ahead to finalizing everything and bringing Sweden into our alliance, our shared alliance. I think this only underscores, yet again, the strategic debacle that Putin's invasion or reinvasion of Ukraine has produced for Russia. A NATO alliance that is both stronger and larger, with the accession of both Finland and now Sweden.
Thoughts of Russia and Ukraine were not far behind for NATO members following the news that Sweden had cleared the final hurdle.
It also sends a very clear message to President Putin that NATO's door is open. We have to remember that he went to war to close NATO's door. He is achieving the exact opposite.
We all need to recommit ourselves to standing up, not just for Ukraine, but through standing up for Ukraine, to the very principles that make our countries strong and free.
The accession of Sweden, which has not been at war since 1814, and Finland is the most significant expansion of NATO since its move into Eastern Europe in the 1990s. While Sweden has ramped up cooperation with the alliance in recent decades, its membership is set to simplify defense planning and cooperation on NATO's northern flank, as well as strengthen NATO's border with Russia. Sweden also brings resources such as cutting-edge submarines tailored to Baltic Sea conditions and a sizable fleet of domestically produced Gripen fighter jets into the alliance. In anticipation of its inclusion, Sweden hiked military spending and should reach NATO's threshold of 2% of GDP this year. For more on NATO and how it operates, we're joined by Dr. Thomas Hughes, Professor of Political and International Relations at Mount Allison University. Thomas, NATO defense spending is back in the headlines this week. It comes after former U.S. President Donald Trump accused some member countries of not meeting their targets. Canadian PM Justin Trudeau spoke about his country's contributions this week as well. Why is defense spending so important for the organization?
So there's a couple of different ways that we can approach the significance of defense spending. In the first instance, defense spending is significant because it relates to the ability of NATO to conduct operations, military operations. The challenge that has really emerged here, and the reason why NATO spending has been in the news so often, is because in 2014, the heads of the NATO members agreed to an aspirational target of spending 2% of their GDP on defense by 2024. This was something that was agreed to. This was something which countries were supposed to be working towards. It wasn't actually absolutely mandated that you had to be spending 2%. It was foundationally, as I say, an aspiration. But the fact that a country does not reach that 2%, perhaps could be taken as a signal that they are less committed to the alliance. The major challenge with this, however, and we have to be really careful around this, is that NATO is not a protection racket, as it were. This is not a case of everyone pays 2% and then you're in the club. The 2% is a guideline, and we need to understand that the 2% of GDP does not actually necessarily absolutely reflect a country's military capability.
And so people might wonder, what's the point of this defense spending? And today, French President Emmanuel Macron suggested that he wouldn't be opposed to putting boots on the ground in Ukraine, while other Western countries were quick to say, no way. We know Ukraine isn't part of the alliance yet, but what's the point of NATO if members aren't willing to get physically involved in conflict?
So I think the really important point to note here, as you referred to, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So the fact that NATO has not put, as you said, boots on the ground in Ukraine is not a reflection of NATO at all. It is not a reflection of NATO's willingness to engage in military activity. It's simply the case that Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and therefore there was no absolute requirement under treaties for NATO members to come and support Ukraine in that fashion. But I think Macron putting that option on the table, if you like, starts that conversation and really helps to solidify that understanding of what NATO is for, what support NATO can provide. And we've seen with Finland and Sweden both joining NATO in recent days, in the case of Sweden, almost certainly in the forthcoming days, that there is a very clear, bright line of distinction between NATO members and non-NATO members.
So as you said, not every country is part of NATO, but there's always opening for new nations to join. What is required from those who want to join?
So it's a really interesting question, and it gets to the heart of what NATO was originally intended for when it was created and how it's developed. And the rules, if you like, for joining NATO are actually set out quite clearly in Article 10 of NATO's founding treaty. So the significant components of this, first is the parties may by unanimous agreement invite any other European state contribute. So there has to be that unanimous agreement, and that's what we've seen with Sweden and Finland. However, the process is almost reversed in the sense that countries ask to be part of NATO to start with. This is not NATO expanding like some sort of invidious empire. States will request to become part of NATO. And when they have done that, if there is unanimous agreement, they will be invited to join. Again, it would have to be a European state, and they would have to be both in accordance with the principles of the treaty. So that is an interesting political and social position that a country has to be in. It has to be part of the global outlook, if you like, of the other NATO member states, and it must be able to contribute to the security of the North Atlantic area.
Thanks so much for speaking with us on Trending Now tonight, Thomas.
No, you're more than welcome. Glad to have a chat.